So, I'm so happy to introduce from Russo. I've known Frank since the time you were completing your PhD. Yeah, he was a baby. He was completing his PhD a lot after Kingston at Queen's University. Since then, he has done a lot. I mean, it's more than 20 years ago, I think. And I knew about all the work he was doing on body cognition, on cognitive psychology, neuroscience sometimes with EEG. But I didn't know he had a certain line of research because it was not published along the same journal as the one he wanted. And I discovered that in Australia, actually, because I was talking about this project that we are developing with Michel Duchelou there at the Faculty of Music, from the Faculty of Music, using music as a field of work to integrate new immigrants. So it's a new project. And I was talking about that new project, and we got the money from the university to do it, and so we are starting, but we have no idea how to do it. So we decided that we should talk to people who had some knowledge. So I was in Australia on sabbatical, and I was told that Russo was working on this topic. And actually, by chance, we were participating to the same. I'm just telling you the little story. We were both invited to give talks in a cochlear implants meeting. See how different it can be. So I knew that he was really working secretly on the social aspects of singing together. And so I thought, I have to talk to him. So we spent hours to just discuss. And I discovered, yes, absolutely.
Along the way.
He has done everything on the topic. So I'm so pleased he's here with us and give just an hour this time of what you learned about. Thank you.
Okay. My pleasure. So thank you for the invitation to BRAMS. It's a pleasure to talk about this work. I will say right from the very beginning that this is not terribly polished work. Although I've been working in the area of social well-being and music in different ways, there are roads that lead into the work I'm going to talk about that are established. The work that I'm going to talk about primarily today is very new, and we haven't drawn firm conclusions. The papers are still in progress. So allow me that as you hear the work. And I welcome your ideas. This is hard stuff to study because it's taking music into the real world and allowing people to do what they do with music. So we have a new grant called SingWell, and it's what the title of the grant is the title of the talk, Understanding Group Singing in Older Adults from a Biopsychosocial Perspective. So the roots of this work that I'm referring to, I think started around 2014. And at that point in time, I did have a SSHRC-funded line of work in my lab, complementary to the main work, the answer kind of work that I do. But to be honest, I was growing, I was becoming disheartened by the kind of work that we were doing in the social sciences. And that work specifically was around emotional responses to music. I think it's important work. I think there's more work to do. But what I was seeing is that the amount of variance we were explaining was so little, and there was so much individual variability. It really depended on the context in which people were listening, people's listening history, and I felt like I wanted to study music in more of an ecological form, something to do with music making in the real world. And so that's why I've got this fork in the road. I don't know how well you can see that. This is some sort of lab logo, and there's a fork in the road. Normally when you're confronted with a fork in the road, you take one road or the other. We took both, and the good news is that these roads then come together to meet at SingWell. So the two roads I'll tell you about next. So the first path was about communication benefits that can be yielded from music. And I know that here in Montreal there's lots of exciting work happening in that area. You know about that kind of work, but I'm going to tell you just a snapshot of the kind of work we're doing and have done around communication benefits that come from music making. So a lot of this work was inspired by Arla Good, who some of you heard speak earlier today. He was a PhD student in my lab, went away, and is now back as the postdoc on the SingWell project. So in one of our projects, we looked at second language learning through music. And essentially we found that teaching children second language using music was more effective than teaching them through spoken word alone. And some of our outcomes were vocabulary, pronunciation. In this more recent iteration of that work, this was a collaboration with Günter Kreutz and some of his colleagues in Oldenburg. We were looking at newly migrated Syrian children in Germany and looking at whether music education could complement their integration in the classroom in addition to language learning. So we find some positive outcomes in both these studies. I'm not going to drill down into any of them. We've been looking at Parkinson's disease. There's a little cottage industry of work that's been done around emotion processing deficits in Parkinson's disease. So this may not be obvious initially, but there's this motor impairment that has these consequences. Isabel mentioned embodied cognition. From the perspective of embodied cognition, you might imagine that our understanding of someone's emotion involves some sort of internal motor simulation. If that's the case, then Parkinson's patients should have some difficulty with that. They do. We've documented that there's less accuracy, longer response times, and we can predict the time it takes to make these emotional responses as a function of their physiological responses to emotional speech. So we've been using singing to rehabilitate some of that functionality, and we've had a little bit of success with that. Again, Arla Good's work, and this involves Isabel as well, a collaboration with Isabel, where we looked at music training in cochlear implant patients, and we compared 6 months of music training with art training and looked at whether those benefits transfer over to emotion understanding, and the short story is that they do. The most recent work here in communication benefits of music making concerns speech perception and noise. This is a vexing problem for older adults with age-related hearing loss. There's not a lot that can be done from the perspective of hearing aids. We've kind of hit a glass ceiling when it comes to what hearing aids can do, and there's some interesting correlational work around musicians having superior performance when it comes to speech and noise. Well, this work has taken a long time to come to fruition, but for about 4 or 5 years now, we've been running singing classes for older adults with hearing loss, and what we're seeing is that they are improving in their speech perception and noise on the order of about 1 dB, which may sound like nothing, but it's very clinically significant. It's something that audiologists get excited about. And we can predict those speech and noise benefits as a function of the ability of the brain to track the fundamental frequency in a speaker's voice. So there's a nice causal mechanism that we think makes sense. You use music to improve your pitch tracking, which then allows you to release your target from the mask. So these are all things that kind of make sense, that have neurocognitive mechanistic explanations, and they're all very exciting, and there's lots of work to do, and that's just a sampling of other work at the bottom that's been done along these lines. But what we've seen, and what Arla and I and other colleagues in the lab have seen again and again when we set up these singing groups, is that the real action, if you like, is in the social dynamics. And boy, wouldn't it have been nice to include some social measures along the way, to somehow formally assess social connectivity, to somehow assess feelings of self-efficacy, these kinds of things. So there's a separate path, again going back to 2014, it started in 2014, around the pro-social benefits of music. So this is a little different. The idea here, if you're not familiar with it, is that when we make music with other people, we feel some sort of connection to those other people. Mechanistically, there are a lot of theories, but one idea is that when we move together with other people, we lose sense of where we end and the next person begins. And all of a sudden, that other person starts to seem more similar to me. And maybe I care more about them. And maybe I feel more connected to them. And I'm more likely to endorse them as a member of my in-group. That's the notion. So we looked at this in a diverse inner-city children's camp. We compared group singing to group art. So both children had cooperative goals, a similar amount of time involved in those programs. But we find that the children that sing together are more likely to play nicely together. I'm not going to drill into those findings. We studied this experimentally in the lab, where we manipulate synchrony. So we have people moving together or moving but out of synchrony. So they're not phase aligned in their rhythmic tapping. And in this case, we used economic sharing gains as our outcome. And we find that undergraduate students are more likely to share the haul of payment that we give them in the case where they are tapping together. Again, there's a lot of work on this subject. It's a hot topic, I think, right now, across the lifespan, from infancy right on into older adults. So these are both fruitful lines of work from my perspective, and we wanted to put them together. So, and we look at music for extra musical benefits, and also track these pro-social benefits, specifically things concerned with social connectivity. Can we get at what the biological bases of some of these effects are? And eventually, where we would like to go is, can we do a better job of predicting who is benefiting from these music interventions as a function of the social benefits? So maybe we spend just as much time in class together doing this music intervention, but I feel that I've met my people. These are my people, I'm connected to all these people, and it forms part of my identity, and I care more. And I try harder. Maybe this is an important portion of variance that we are not accounting for. And when I say we now, I mean people in cognitive neuroscience that are interested in neuroplasticity. Okay, so that's a lot of theoretical gobbledygook, and then I could just turn to Paul McCartney for, for a light perspective on that. I love to hear a choir. I love the humanity, to see the faces of real people devoting themselves to a piece of music. I like the teamwork. It makes me feel optimistic about the human race when I see them cooperating like that. So maybe it's just common sense that yes, people make music together, they must and they feel connected with one another as a result. Okay, so again, this is the merging of the two paths that I mentioned. Or the brand at 2018 to 2020, and so we're still in the process of figuring out the data. So for those of you who were here earlier today, you heard some of these themes, but for those who weren't, common challenges faced by older adults, regardless of whether they're living with age-related diseases or not, are things like depression, loneliness, sensory motor deficits impacting communication, social isolation, and stigma. So in our culture, I think there still is stigma around aging. When I say our, I mean maybe North American culture. But there's definitely stigma around living with an age-related disease. So all of a sudden, you're a healthy older adult, you have a stroke, now you have aphasia. It changes your ability, if you like, your conceptualization of your ability to act in the world. So older adults are doing lots of choral singing. We know from our partners at Choral Canada that singing is on the rise in Canada. This is a quote from, we've run a few Parkinson's choirs, but our oldest Parkinson's choir started about 5 years ago, and Kate Lee has been in our choirs for almost as long. At this point, I don't feel like my Parkinson's defines me as much as it used to. Now that I've been singing with the group for a while, I feel that I'm also a singer who's part of a vibrant community. So the interesting thing for me here is that now the disability has become, the association with Parkinson's and disability has now become a focus on abilities. Look at me, I'm powerful. I have Parkinson's and I sing. I don't have this. This deficit is not going to get the better. Okay, I'm throwing lots of ideas around here, but there's an old evolutionary psychology idea around how we got from social grooming, as we see our primate cousins doing, where we develop these pair bonds in the group and nurture them by grooming one another. What happened when we lost all our hair, when we started living in bigger and bigger groups where we couldn't maintain the group as effectively through this kind of manual grooming? So one interesting idea that's been put forward by many theorists is that singing and dance occupied that role and allowed for group sizes to flourish. Now you could maintain harmony in a group that was larger than 20 or 30 people. Maybe you could now have groups of 100 or 200 people living together if we're all nurturing our bonds without manually grooming. It's an interesting idea. And I think the core piece of this has something to do with touch. But here we can't touch people. There's just too many of them. So a proxy for touch becomes synchronized movement. It's so I'm foreshadowing. Yeah, I'm going to leave that thought. I think we can think about synchronized movement as a proxy for touch. So I mentioned looking at the biological roots of some of this. So we're interested in the opioid system, the endogenous opioid system in particular. It's been linked to pleasure and pain. It's been linked to all kinds of things, but we're going to focus on pleasure and pain. And we're also interested in cortisol and oxytocin. So cortisol, of course, is implicated in stress. So when we get increases in stress, we get a boost in cortisol, and stress regulation exercises like meditation seem to decrease cortisol. Oxytocin, of course, is famously a bonding, involved in bonding. New mothers have a surge of oxytocin. When mothers are nursing, they have a surge of oxytocin. Note that those are both touch kind of activities. When people have sex, they have an increase in oxytocin. Again, a touch kind of activity, but I think there's a hint of oscillation and synchrony there. So cortisol and oxytocin are what I'm going to focus on mostly today, but we're going to get to endorphins in our work eventually. It's just we haven't run those assays yet. The results I'll share with you are focused on these two systems. Okay, so these are the groups that we're studying in SingWell, and there's about 15 choirs at the moment around the country. I'm going to focus today on those groups in yellow. So an aphasia group, a breathing disorders group, healthy aging, Parkinson's disease. We've tried to start some choirs around dementia. We've honestly had some difficulties. There's probably people in the room here who've done it successfully, but it's not an easy thing to do. And we've done quite a bit of work around age-related hearing loss, but I guess I'm not going to talk so much about that because our results there tend to focus more on the auditory benefits, not so much the social benefits. So some research questions now that I'm going to focus on. Does choir singing support psychological and social well-being in older adults living with and without disease? And do these benefits accrue over time? So maybe people feel better in the moment, but do they feel better and better as they keep doing this thing? That's an important question. Does choir singing confer a unique benefit to social well-being over and above other group activities? It's an important question, and we can't have enough studies about this. I think it's always hard to find the right control group, and every control group is a little bit problematic, to be honest, because nothing's exactly like singing. So we have to chisel away and get at what is, if there is something that's special about singing, what is it exactly? Is choir singing different from solo singing with respect to psychological and social well-being? So this is a question we often get. Is it fine that I just sing in the shower myself or sing in the car? Are they going to get the same benefits? Okay, so our pass at this first research question, we're going to have multiple passes at these questions. Don't worry, not all in this talk, but I mean in the course of this training. But our first pass at this involves comparing two newly established choirs. I should say that sometimes these choirs that we're tracking, we've set up ourselves, and sometimes we're piggybacking on pre-existing choirs. There's benefits to both. The obvious thing about pre-existing choirs is we don't have to do the hard work of recruiting, assembling, finding a director, etc. The downside is that you can't look at the evolution in social connectivity. So these are both newly established. We're looking at pre-post effects and session effects. So within a session, what we do is we do some pre-tests, then we do the singing, and it's usually about an hour to an hour and a half. And there's usually social time afterwards of about half an hour. And we do the post-test. And this all happens in a session, but we also do some baseline testing before everything begins. We typically look at things around week 2 or 3, then again around week 7 or 8, and in some cases we come back around week 12 or 13. Okay, so here are the demographics for our healthy aging group. And our partners in Winnipeg at Return Parkinson's. It's a very interesting group. It was founded by the winner of the first Great Canadian Race. I don't know if you've seen that television show. There's an amazing race in the US. We have one in Canada. And the winner was diagnosed with Parkinson's just before he was selected. So he's kind of like a superhero in the Parkinson's community. He's got them doing all kinds of things. He was excited to start an singing group. Okay, our outcome measures looking at positive and negative mood, looking at the PANAS, looking at pain thresholds. I haven't fully set up the pain thresholds as much as I would like, because I'm jamming a bunch into this talk. But remember that pain is linked to the opioid system. So there's some interesting evidence that singing has this analgesic effect. Singers also, it's a common anecdote that people say, I sleep better after a session. I don't notice my pain so much. So we wanted to test pain in a way, I'll show you how we tested it in just a second. We also looked at social connectedness. It's an aggregate measure involving trust, how much I like these other people that I'm singing with, how connected do I feel to them, how similar do I feel to them. We also use something common in social psychology, the inclusion of other in self scale. It's a visual scale, and I'll show you that in just a moment. And we track the biomarkers of cortisol and oxytocin eventually, but I'm not showing you the oxytocin data here in this first pass. Okay, so PANAS, again, positive, negative mood. Pain thresholds. There are sophisticated machines for measuring pain. There's problems with, our crew comes in just before choir, has to test a whole bunch of people and not intervene too much, then let them do their thing. That won't work. So we need a quick way to assess pain with many people. So we bought a bunch of what are called dolorimeters, and I was thinking of the other word, algometers. Yeah. So dolorimeters, and basically you apply pressure and it registers the amount of pressure per square centimeter on skin as you're pressing down, and they tell you when it starts to get painful. So it's a pain threshold. So we do this before and after. And this is the inclusion of other inclusion of others in self scale. So I view myself as basically being the same as other people. I view myself as being quite distinct from all these other people. It's a continuum. And then we have, we take our saliva samples is what we're working with, again, for speed. And actually, we can assay all this back at Ryerson. We have a wet lab for this that we've developed some competency around using. So now we're able to run these assays ourselves, which is very nice. Okay, so now I'm going to start giving you a whack of data, and I'll try to keep you awake because it kind of all looks the same. So this is positive affect that is happening in our first visit to the choir. So there's nothing going on, and our second visit to the choir. Pre in orange, post in gray. So you see there's a boost in positive affect following the second session of choir, both in the healthy aging group and in the Parkinson's group. So we can speculate why that might be. One possibility is that this is the first time I've ever sang with these folks. These are all strangers. I'm better than most of these folks. I know how to they seem funny. And I don't really think of myself as a singer. But then you start singing some songs together and you start to think, well, that kind of sounds like the song. And I think by the second session, you start having some positive feelings about your competency as a group. We don't have data to support all of that conjecture, but I suspect that's what's going on. Negative affect, there's not much going on. No real. There's something in the first session, a decrease in negative affect, but not much going on. Pain thresholds. So we get a consistent boost in pain thresholds. So we see it in the first session, we see it in the second session, we see it both in healthy aging and in Parkinson's. So again, this means that you can withstand more pain after you sing than before you sing. There could be all sorts of reasons for this. Like, it's not necessarily anything to do with the singing. It could be the cardiovascular exercise. It could just be, hey, I got out of the house and I did something. You need more information. But there you go. Like in all cases, they feel a little bit stronger than they did before they came in. So what's going on with salivary cortisol, a stress hormone? So we see that there are drops across the board. We see a significant drop here in the healthy aging group in the second session. So another thing I'll say about these samples is they are quite small, and I think in some cases we need to run multiple cohorts in order to get enough power to show effects on these various measures. It's promising, though, that the trends are all moving like that. Social connectedness. So we see a real boost in social connectedness in the first session, both in healthy aging. We see it in. Yeah, we really see the difference in the boost in healthy aging. You see a real boost there. Still a boost, but not as much of a boost. The other thing that we see across both groups is a session effect, where I feel more connected to these people now in the second session than I did in the first session. So I'm going to elaborate a little bit on that larger boost that you see in the first session. I thought it was. My eye, yeah, carry on. So, social closeness, we see again, a session effect, and we see the boost here in the first session, the strong boost. There's nothing going on at all in the Parkinson's group, but this Parkinson's group is not, there's probably a reason for this. This Parkinson's community, they were new to singing with one another, but they all go to this community center for Parkinson's. So they're not strangers to one another. So it's possible that that's the reason we're not seeing any increase in social closeness there. There could be other reasons as well. Okay, so this came up earlier today. So a new idea that we're entertaining is the proposed. Yeah. So I mean, we've been talking about it in the lab for a little while. Why do people get these cumulative benefits week on week when, from what we've seen in other data in the literature, available literature, it would seem that the effects on social connectedness that come from joint movement are limited. They're time limited. There's no evidence to suggest that walking together, rowing together, singing together, drumming together is going to cause us to feel more connected to that other individual a week from now. It's going to cause us to feel connected immediately. But I would be shocked to find that there are effects that have longevity. But what we see is that the groups grow closer from week on week. So the bread here in this analogy is the social conversation that folks have after they sing together. We think of the singing as the butter. It's the boost in social cohesion. Maybe there is a boost in oxytocin that happens, and maybe that causes people to be more ready to share experiences. But it's those concrete experiences of, this is what my life is like, here are my challenges, here are new things that I'm trying, that form real friendships. So hopefully we can unpack that mechanistically at some point. So here's some more evidence for that bread and butter. So here you see this big, we're looking only at healthy older adults over 3 sessions now. So at week, I guess this is around week 12 or 13. This is week 7 or 8, and this is week 1. So we get the big boost in pre-post difference in week 1. We get a little boost at week 7. We get a little boost again at week 13. But we get these week over week cumulative benefits. this is where the bread and butter theory logic comes from. Okay, we see this both in connectedness and closeness measures. So Pierce, Linné, and Dunbar referred to this particular effect, this boost, this immediate boost in social closeness that comes from music making as the icebreaker effect. So they compared music making with other activities, other coordinated activities, not synchronous activities, but other kinds of activities involving some kind of social coordination. And they also found that they got this big boost in the first session. So this is across 3 sessions with our Parkinson's group. And there, I don't think we're seeing the icebreaker effect in week 1, but that's because the ice has already melted. Right? As I said, this is a community that already exists. So there's no ice to break. They already know one another, but we still see the week-on-week benefits. So even though I know you, every week I get maybe a surge of oxytocin, maybe I'm more ready to talk to you, maybe I'm more ready to nurture, kindle that friendship. So, summary of research question 1, does Parkinson support psychological and social well-being in adults living with and without Parkinson's disease? We see a positive shift in mood, mostly in session 2, increased pain thresholds in both groups, decreased cortisol in both groups, increased connectedness and closeness in both groups. The icebreaker effects are only seen in the new community, as might be expected. And the session effect suggests overall benefits do accrue over time. Research question 2, does choir singing confer a unique advantage for social connectivity? Here is a case where I think we need lots of controls, but this is our first pass at it. Again, we have a pre-test, we have group activity, and a post-test. And here our comparison group is yoga. Maybe this is not obvious, it was a bit opportunistic. The yoga group lives at the U-Tune Center that Tim Hughes, the winner of the Amazing Race Canada, said. He also did boxing, but we didn't see boxing as a reasonable control to get our heads around it. But yoga is interesting because yoga involves cardiovascular activity. Maybe it's coordinated. We have, on some level, we have coordinated goals. We all want to better ourselves, but there isn't synchronization. There isn't synchronized movement. I'm not a practitioner of yoga, but I gather that it's about focusing inward and tuning into your own body rhythms. It's not worrying about someone else's. So again, small groups, 9 and 10, but we're seeing some interesting things. So we looked at PANAS again, connectedness measure, closeness measure, and both cortisol and oxytocin we've analyzed in this study. So here we see effects on positive affect, pre-post in choir and yoga. So this resonates with common experience. I go sing in choir, I feel better after choir. I go to yoga, I feel better after yoga class. No change on negative affect. Salivary cortisol, very interesting. We see a drop in both choir, which is a replication of many other studies. There's only one study that showed an increase in cortisol that I'm aware of that showed an increase in cortisol, but there's a good explanation for why it happened in escalator. And yoga also got a drop in cortisol. If you're wondering about the different baseline levels, I think it has to do with the diurnal pattern of cortisol and the fact that we couldn't control the time. So the yoga group happened earlier in the day when cortisol was high. It happened around 11, and choir happens around 2. So this is one of the things that happens with field work. To some extent, we have to, or field experiments in this case, you need to work So here is connectedness and closeness. So not too much going on. Oh, thank you, Arlo. Yeah. The group differences. So we do have more. So these were not taken at, these were not taken initially. These were taken at week 13.
They've both been running for several months.
Okay, so in this case, these are all established groups, and we do see a group difference. So more social connectedness in the choir group than the yoga group, more closeness, but we're not seeing those effects. Oxytocin, I meant to do drum roll please for oxytocin. So you know, the bread, to give some credence to the bread and butter theory, you should expect that there's some kind of boost. From pre to post, we get an increase in oxytocin for choir, but not for yoga. They're both exercise, both cardiovascular exercise. They're both group activities. They spend about the same amount of time. What's different? Well, one of the things that's different is synchronized movement that's happening in choir that isn't happening in yoga. There could be other factors. We need more controls, but I think this is interesting. So maybe there's this oxytocin boost. And maybe that's part of the magic around group singing that leads to these week-over-week benefits. We were more ready to connect with other people, and then we have that social time, that ability to exchange personal stories, the way people get to know one another in a relationship, and we feel closer to people. So to summarize, are the benefits due to group activity, or is there something specific to choir? Both choir and yoga see a positive shift in mood. Both choir and yoga decrease in cortisol. Only choir sees increase in social closeness. Only choir sees increase in oxytocin. Third and last research question for today, and just some other snapshots. Is the group critical? Everything I've said up to you until now suggests that we need the group. We don't have the group, we don't have synchronized movement, we don't get the oxytocin piece, we don't have the opportunity for social connectivity. So we took one of the choirs we established, the Healthy Aging Choir, and we tested them, this is one test right at the very beginning, this is after they've been singing for a while, but we had one test involving a variety of these social well-being measures that happened at choir, and then another similar test that happened in the lab, where we had them come into a double-walled sound booth and sing by themselves with the choir director on an audio track guiding them through the singing that they're doing. So our dependent measures are PANAS, social connectedness, and the biomarkers cortisol and oxytocin. So we see an increase in positive affect in choir singing, nothing in private singing. I don't feel better after I sing in the group. I see a drop in salivary cortisol, both when I'm singing in the group and I'm singing privately. This suggests to us that the cortisol drop is something to do with either cardiovascular activity or the controlled breathing that can come from singing. So, drum roll. That's where I need my audio effects. Imagine social connectedness, we see that there is a group effect. So people feel more connected when they are evaluating their closeness to other people in the choir when they're actually in the choir as compared to when they're in the lab. Maybe you're not so excited about it. It's kind of a funny interpretation, funny finding, but it's something that we look at. Oxytocin, we see the expected boost in oxytocin, but only for group singing. So you need other humans singing with you. You need synchronous movement happening in order to get that oxytocin boost. You don't get it when you're singing alone. So at this point, we think that some of the benefits for social well-being really are mediated by synchronous movement and oxytocin release. So to summarize, is choir singing different from solo singing with respect to psychological and social well-being? We see an increase in positive mood for choir singing only, decrease in cortisol for both choir and private singing, increase in oxytocin for choir singing only. Okay, so that's kind of the story to date. It's as much theory building as we can do based on the data we've processed. There's more to come. 2 quick snapshots now to look at what, we're interested in general phenomena, but we're also interested in what's happening in specific populations. So I'm going to talk about 2 of those populations, people with breathing disorders and people with living with aphasia, expressive aphasia. And both of those groups are interesting because you can imagine right away the kind of vocal benefits that are going to come from singing, independent of these social well-being benefits. So again, this is work with Günter Kreutz in Oldenburg. Günter started a choir for people with COPD with one of his clinical collaborators in the hospital, and it's a very impressive choir. I've been there, Arla's been there, and they have about 50 to 100 people come out in any given sing, and they all sing basically in the lobby of this choir, and they come down with their IVs and various pieces of equipment, and they all sing together. So we tested them at only one time point here. We're working on other breathing disordered choirs where we can look at some longitudinal things, I hope, but in this case it's just the one time point. And we looked at social connectivity, mood, perceived stress, and cortisol to date. All of these measures are adapted. We translated them into German. As a side story, I traveled to Germany and I brought the saliva home with me from all these people. And it was a fun little adventure. I came prepared with all my REP stuff printed out, all my documentation, and I fully expected to be sent to office, and I did, and with a smile on. Eventually I got on the plane, they held up the plane, and I got on it with my suitcase full of saliva. So, very proud of that. So, we could have shipped it, if you're wondering, because you can ship overnight frozen samples, but we had a shipment from Winnipeg, Vale, frozen Winnipeg. It didn't thaw by the time it got to us. So since I was going to Germany anyway, I just thought I'd pick it up. So the choir is interesting as well because you get other people coming down to the lobby to sing, not only people with COPD. Sometimes it's loved ones. Sometimes it's other people in the hospital that have disease, but in this comparison, we're filtering those folks out. We're just looking at healthy people that we're singing and COPD people that we're singing. So it's a kind of a mixed choir. We see a boost in social connectivity in both groups, and a marginal effect on mood. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of variability, and we see a pre-post difference in perceived stress, both in healthy and COPD individuals. And we see a corresponding pattern of findings when it comes to cortisol. So we've started a new aphasia choir. This is the second one we started. The first one never got off the ground. These things are hard to start. And this one is with the March of Dimes Foundation. They're very willing to partner. And, so it's a new choir, and we're taking vocal measures. We don't have any of those vocal outcome measures processed yet. But we also looked at the SingWell kind of measures, mood, pain thresholds, a subjective evaluation of the voice. So that should mirror what we see in the vocal acoustics, and a measure of social connectivity. So we see an increase in positive mood in people living with expressive aphasia. I should mention that aphasia is considered the most debilitating disease to live with. This is what I understand from my aphasia colleagues. I don't really know how you fully assess this, but when you compare it to living with cancer, to living with other serious diseases, aphasia is considered the most debilitating one. We see an increase in pain thresholds in aphasia. We stopped measuring them after our first assessment of pain. We were a little alarmed. Their pain thresholds are ridiculously high to begin with, and we're not entirely sure why. It could be a communication issue, but we get the effect that we've seen in other groups. Confidence using the voice increases, so this is a good sign, and other groups have documented this. But again, what we hope to do is connect the social measures to these vocal measures and the vocal acoustic measures. And in this case, they're going to, even though our current round of data collection is done here, they're continuing this choir, so we'll have other opportunities. And social connectivity is, it's not increasing week on week. This is little data, small groups, but here's our interpretation of this. Maybe it's obvious to Isabel. So there's no bread. There's no bread. They got the butter. They're singing together. So they got, when we measure the oxytocin, I hope we'll see that they get the boost and they feel more connected with other people. So with music, they sang together, they felt connected. But we do have the social time afterwards, but they're not as able to utilize this social time. And maybe you need that in order to get week-on-week benefits. It's little data, but this is where our bread and butter theory is coming from. All of these little things. Okay, so just limitations and challenges. We're working consistently with small and heterogeneous groups. This requires aggregation over multiple cohorts. And the participants do differ from cohort to cohort. So this creates challenges. There's also the issue that I just hinted at of legacy that also came up, and Preach raised it earlier, that if you start one of these new choirs, then what? You test them for 13 weeks, and they love it, and they want more of it, and then you go away. So there's a lot of this that has happened in many areas of research, especially in Canada, vulnerable populations. There's lots of horror stories. We don't want to be guilty of this kind of stuff. So we've been trying to figure out ways to keep these choirs going, and we've exercised a few of those. So from doing our own fundraising to I've actually established a nonprofit organization that's now a registered charity. This is the Singing with Parkinson's, and they now perform out of the Four Seasons in Toronto, where the Canadian Opera Company performs. And this is not regular research. It's hard work to do. It's lots of public relations and meeting and putting on concerts and things. It's a little bit exhausting, but I think if you're going to do this kind of work, maybe you want to do a piece of that too. We've also kept things going. So in the case of March of Dimes, we had a speech-language pathologist who was a singer, musician. She was motivated. She'll keep it going for a while. So that's another way we can keep it going. And I'm blanking on the other ways in which we've done this. Anything come to mind? UTunes is an established group, yeah. So there we've hooked into an organization that runs classes, and that's a good way, I think, to keep these things going. And we've done the same thing at our continuing education school at Ryerson, the Chang School of Continuing Education. I'm now their music coordinator, and so I they put on classes for older adults with hearing loss and now older adults for music listening, which forms a control group. This is great. They run it, they take the money, all of that, and they'll keep it going. But it's something to be mindful of. Okay, so summary and discussion. Choir participation appears to lead to increases in positive affect, pain thresholds, social connectivity, decreases in cortisol, and increases in oxytocin. The benefits appear to be comparable in older adults living with disease and without disease. Future work will involve digging into some of the mechanisms, but we also want to look at social well-being benefits related to communication gains that are owed to choir singing. So these social well-being benefits, are they predicting improvements in speech and noise in our age-related hearing loss choirs? Are they in any way predicting speech level and pitch range improvements that we see in Parkinson's disease? Do we see improvements in voice quality as measured by jitter and shimmer in COPD? Do we see increases in articulation in expressive aphasia? I think that this will give us a more fulsome, complete picture of the benefits of singing. Our focus here is on social well-being. We're trying to dive deep on that, but eventually we want to connect it back to some of the other extra musical benefits that the music and science community is excited about these days. So I think that's everything I have. Thank you for your attention. Thank you to these wonderful people and these partners. I think I'm okay, so yeah, I'll take any questions. But if someone is, someone's a dangerous question, so you need to shut it down.
So thank you once again for being here today and for all the discussions we've had already. I would like to propose that in true Montreal fashion, we should have a croissant model where you have the bread and the butter together.
Nice, you got it right. That's right.
But I also had a question about the subjective measures. So given there's like a lot of media attention now on like benefits of singing and that people might be aware of this and that you're explicitly evaluating how close do you feel to people, how do you think that those measures might affect?
It's a great question. Yeah. It's also the question is there sort of a performance demand that comes from all the attention, like, oh, I've heard about the lab, they're studying the benefits of singing, I better not let them down. I concede that can be an effect on all sorts of outcome measures. I try to incorporate some measure that I think is not going to be vulnerable to that. So, for example, in the choir singing for speech perception and noise, we have the frequency following response as one of our measures, and maybe someone will convince me why that's susceptible to motivation. It might be, but I haven't seen that in the literature. And I have a harder time understanding how cortisol and oxytocin are going to be driven. It's possible, you could convince me, but so my short answer is I concede that motivation may be an important piece of some of these gains, and it's hard to do pure research in this area. Like, it's messy for all kinds of reasons, and yet another reason is the media. But thank God for the media. I think it's getting the word out.
Yeah, because I think to me the most the interesting measures were the oxytocin and also this prisoner's dilemma thing that we presented before, like how people act in social situations after you administer this kind of thing. So
you're more worried about the subjective.
Yeah, I guess, and I mean, I don't know if that.
No, that's part of why we have the multi-outcome approach. I didn't even talk about the qualitative data, mostly because I'm completely out of my depth when it comes to the qualitative data. But there's a wealth of information there that we'll find as well.
Thank you so much, Frank. This is really fascinating. So it's true that you have very small samples of patients, but I find still amazing to still have this big effect. And this is preliminary, this is just small cohorts, but there's something interesting there.
Yeah.
The point is that nevertheless, within the small groups, you're going to have, I'm pretty sure, big individual differences. We are talking about older adults and Parkinson. And I'm sure that you see people who are more responding than others, responders or responders. So is there a way to basically link these individual differences to the initial condition? So, you seem like to say, well, it seems that synchronization, coordination is something which may play an important role in singing. Is there a way to link these individual differences in the effect of the, so to speak, intervention to initial conditions? And the reason why I'm asking that, is, for example, in Parkinson, this is what we see. We have not even tested in the past, social effects. But we know that those patients who, among the Parkinson patients, are spared relatively in treating synchronization ability, these are those who benefit more. So do you think something is something that you are doing that direction? It would be very interesting.
It would be. So we've seen similar things in our. So is there a sweet spot? Like a lot of times with interventions, like Bayesian interventions, that's work that's been around for a long time, and they become a little more sophisticated. They look for who is this intervention and I think we will get there as well as a community. So I've seen a little bit of that when it comes to speech perception and noise. Now I'm not talking about a social well-being outcome, but it seems like the people that are benefiting from the most have, it's like an inverted view. Like the people with the most hearing loss can't benefit, at least so far in the way we've done it. They can't benefit from the choir training. The people that have almost no hearing loss can't benefit. So people with mild to moderate seem to be benefiting. At this stage, that's what it seems like. Mild to moderate hearing loss is the best candidate for singing as an intervention when it comes to speech perception and noise. But we need much more data. I think the same is probably true for the social aspects, and I'm going off the top of my head, but I think you might predict them from the same measures. Like if you have a lot of damage to the substantia nigra in Parkinson's, you have a real mobility problems, then I think you're less likely to reap the social benefits of group singing, because you're less likely to synchronize as well. Maybe you also feel less effective as a singer, and you feel like a little bit of an outcast, even though I'm contributing to the group. So yeah, that's an excellent thought. Eventually, when we have big data, it would be good to dig into that.
Regarding the social benefits, and I thought the data about the aphasic patient was very interesting. I'm wondering, and coming back to your analogy of the bread and butter.
Good.
And by the way, we're in Montreal. I think we're forgetting the bagels too. just saying.
Yeah, no, I love the Montreal bagel. Yeah.
Anyway, back. Sorry for this tangent. But so it seems that in intervention, for us to have the social benefits, we need to have the bread too. So we need to integrate some social like some social moments, some social interaction between the participants. And that seems to not have been the case with aphasic patients. So does that mean that in practice we should try to, like in classrooms or in rehabilitation setting, always set some low human exchange moments, so like that are outside of the music or within the music?
Yeah, that would, at this early stage, I would make that recommendation. But for a whole bunch of reasons, it doesn't make sense to send people out the door. Try to find enough time in your booking so that people can have even a glass of water and, of course, nothing, and just chat. I think it's not, like the bread and butter is kind of a big idea, but it's also, I think, people are more likely to be willing participants if they don't feel like they're being treated like cattle. Like, oh, I showed up, I spit into the tube, and now I have to go home. I think that that's probably part of it too. But absolutely, I think we tend to book a room for 2 hours and sing for about an hour, 15 minutes to an hour and a half. There's a break in the middle.
So there's a big proportion of time.
Yeah, there's a big proportion of time for social. I think it allows the group to sustain itself. And I think real choirs do this. Like real choirs, if you've been in a music ensemble of any kind, I think I haven't been in one, but I've heard of people that really just go play with people and go away. But I don't think you really, it's not the same kind of friendships that are developed. And at the core of this, I think, I don't know if we can pin it down to oxytocin release, but I think that makes some sense. That's part of it. But everyone who played music with other people in this room has had that moment, that experience of feeling like, my God, I'm really connected to the people around me. I don't know what just happened. I don't know where, I feel like I just picked up someone else's idea. It's, I think there is something really important about rhythmic human activity there. Another idea, and we don't have any data to test it here, but it comes up always in our discussion, is whether this is just about synchronous movement, or is there something special about singing beyond synchronous movement? People need to do experiments to figure this out. But it's possible that there is something in singing above and beyond just tapping, let's say. Like for one, it's fun, it's motivating. But there's also the idea of coordinated emotional experiences. So we have an emotional trajectory that we're following. And maybe that kind of shared experience also contributes to the social connectivity boost. But that remains to be determined. It could be that we're really simple robots. You just have to flip the synchronous movement switch, and we make babies and friends. I don't know. Be careful of dancing.
Thank you for the talk. I think it's really interesting for the future of rehabilitation. And I was curious about the hearing loss group. Did these people, they have hearing aids or?
So we had one person with a hearing aid in all the choirs for, probably had like 8 of these cohorts come through. And actually, this partial sponsor of this work is the hearing instrument manufacturer. They're super interested in that question.
Yeah.
And so now we're running a randomized control trial. It's registered, and it's only people with hearing aids. I can't say too much about it because it's small groups. Like we run 7 people at a time, and there seem to be some improvements, but there's so much variability.
Randomized with what?
Music listening and a waitlist control. So there, the ads say we put on sessions. Come to Ryerson University, find out about music and science and benefits of music, and then we say that there are these benefits. We're recruiting, and then they get assigned to a music listening group. And the music listening group, we haven't had the experience of people saying, "Hey, what's going on? This is not the real treatment." We're giving them homework to do, like listening, finding, hearing the different lines of music, looking for common themes across artists, some ideas that come to mind. So that's our control group. I have another thought also.
When you were measuring like the graphic versus the solo, saying that you don't measure the connectedness, whereas like, well, I guess some singing doesn't have like some kind of social effect, but still it went up, or I don't remember.
So positive affect went up for the group singing and not for and then cortisol went down for both. And there's more social connectivity. But this is the one I don't, I think I should eliminate the slide. Yeah. But we have the data, I'm afraid. So, and there's oxytocin.
So you think it is because there's like engagement, because like if it's solo, it's a private feature, right?
It's on a recording. So like the teacher is saying, okay, class, we're going to do these warm-up exercises.
It's not in person.
It's not. No, we didn't put a person and the choir director in the booth. It's been a lot of work, expensive. But you know, the data could have kind of come out different. In the social psychology literature, there's this idea around the effectiveness of imagined contact. So the way to mitigate intergroup stresses is just to put people together. And it's more complicated, but positive contact. Put them together doing positive things together, and a group that doesn't like the other group is you're going to break the ice. They're going to be more friendly. But there have been some experimental social psychology studies where they just ask people to imagine contact with the other group, and they find similar effects. So it could have worked out that we had people really imagine that they're with their class and they're singing now with their class, and maybe we would have also, if we had enhanced imagination more, maybe you see an oxytocin effect. I'm totally introspecting now, but I feel like when I listen to music, and it's music that I know the words to and that I know very well, and I've been to a concert specifically of the performed this music, I feel like I have that social connectivity effect I have in a concert. I think it's possible to imagine yourself moving with the other people. That's another interesting one.
I don't really know the literature, but how many people do you need for a group? If you have one other person, is that enough to sing with?
Yeah, I guess that's it. We've seen effects with groups as small as 3 and 4 people, like in synchronized tapping. Have people found pro-social benefits from duets?
Yes.
Okay.
In the dilemma.
Yeah. 2 people at a time.
Yeah, it was just a participant evidence down
Yeah. And then there's a whole line of work that Peter Keller, I guess, is working on around simulated partners, and I guess he looks at the receptivity of the partner, and that would only be one other partner. Doesn't take much.
Just basically with a follow-up of that. So here you have the distinction between private, solo versus group. So diet is a small group, we agree, but so how about the situation where you are in a group without the partner, basically interacting? There's a group, in a group or in a diet, of course, is a bi-directional tapping, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, looking at somebody and singing with a video,
Yeah.
with an audio video recording, is something you think may be sufficient?
I do think it's
So
sufficient.
this would be choral singing, but it's something which doesn't adapt to you, you adapt to it.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I don't have. It's an interesting question. It's an interesting question. I do think that you can get the synchronous movement effects from vision alone. I don't think it's bound. Audition is better, of course, for timing precision activities, but I would think that you can get it from visual alone. As to whether you can do it within, you can have positive feelings towards a partner. It's kind of like unrequited love, right? Like if they're not receptive to your, I don't know. I'm guessing no. I don't know. But then people get really infatuated about people that don't. So who knows?
I have teach singing private lessons and musical theater lessons for 5 to 6 years, and so I had probably 30 groups of like music theater in the years I was teaching. But I had one time a group of what is the word for that?
Down syndrome?
Down syndrome? Yeah, I was having like 10 Down syndrome adults, which were coming each week to like making musical theater with me. And I have never seen a group more enthusiastic to come to their lesson, and like the parents were so like impressed about how their communication was better, how their mood was better, how their synchronization, like they're just like they were less clumsy, yeah. And yeah, so it would have been interesting to see what that is.
Absolutely. And there's lots of interest in autism spectrum disorder, but by comparison, there's far more potential in Down syndrome. It's interesting to see those kinds of benefits.
Yeah, but the hard part was to stop the group at the end of the schooling year, so it was really a difficult moment for them to have to stop there.
You briefly mentioned different groups with different disabilities. You really briefly mentioned a study on dementia. I was personally interested in the fact, I'm not sure how familiar with your results in that group. Could you briefly...
The grid folded because the families got concerned about all the things we were going to do to them. They read the consent and everything, but once they actually saw the pain devices and the saliva, it was a horrible mess. So I think we've learned from this, and we're going to we've got a partner who has a good network of people living with dementia, and we're going to try again. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of interesting work around music dementia. These brief increases in cognitive lucidity that seem to happen. It would be interesting to see if you also see these increases in social connectivity.
Maybe we can stop here because I can see that people need to leave, but please stay around. We have a talk here, and you are welcome to stay around and talk to Frank as long as he wishes. So thank you.